Welcome to the Penn State Show here on DK Sports Radio. As usual, I'm your host, Audrey Snyder. And interesting week in Nittany Nation. James Franklin, I think, officially, finally, looks anyway, rounded out his coaching staff with the addition of Snyder. And Snyder joins Penn State after being the running backs coach at Florida. And he was since shifted to the tight end job at Florida, but comes to Penn State with a really impressive resume. I mean, we're talking about a guy who coached the running backs of Florida, is a really big-time recruiter, Florida native with ties to South Florida, spent 8 years coaching at high schools in Florida, and specifically South Florida, and also played most of his college ball at West Virginia. So this is a guy who played at West Virginia, of course, had coached with the Mountaineers, also at one point was a GA at West Virginia. So, you know, Penn State this week, they officially lose who was wide receivers coach Josh Gaddis, who went to Alabama. So that became official early on in the week after being, rumored to be happening last weekend. And you look at that move for Gaddis and it makes a ton of sense. This is a guy who hasn't been shy about his aspirations of wanting to be an offensive coordinator and then eventually wanting to be a head coach. So that's a move that's going to get him closer to that step. I mean, you're learning under Nick Saban with the defending national champs, a program that won 5 of the last 9 national titles. You've got a really dominant, explosive, exciting offense in Alabama that still has a lot of young aspects to it. But you look at the way Gaddis recruited at Penn State, and I think that's what makes the addition of Snyder so important to this staff, because Penn State lost their top recruiter. And to his credit, yet again, James Franklin goes out, makes a hire, and, really looking at kind of Snyder's track record and the people that he's been able to recruit, the guys that he's been able to help mold. Charles Sims is the name that comes to mind. Wendell Smallwood. Any Eagles fans listening, I'm sure they'd be familiar with that as well. But the important thing is here that they went out and got a guy who not only helps round out the one vacant assistant coach job on their staff, and Snyder will coach the running backs, and I'll get to how that impacts the rest of the staff here in a minute, but you then go and get someone who can really help you on the recruiting trail. And to Penn State's credit, I mean, we've seen these recruiting classes get better and better under James Franklin, and a huge part of that, of course, was Gaddis, but this is also a staff that's had some really good recruiters on it. Charles Huff, again, who's now at Mississippi State, was certainly one of those guys who helped as well. But you just look at the way this program is being built, and time again, it goes back to recruiting and who are you bringing in? How are you developing your program? And I just think that Penn State, especially given the timing of this move, the fact that I would assume Franklin, and this is just me kind of behind the 8 ball here, but I would assume Franklin probably thought that he had his staff intact. Then the offer from Gaddis comes up. That kind of then changes everything because Gaddis says, I'm sure some of you remember, had also been elevated to passing game coordinator earlier this offseason. So they kind of gave him an extra title, but ultimately I'd be willing to bet the pay was probably a little bit better. You're going to Alabama, learning under Nick Saban, all those things. But what it means for Penn State is you bring Snyder in, who has more experience with the running backs, so he will move over and coach those guys, which then means David Corley, who was brought in to originally coach the running backs, it was announced Thursday that Corley will now be the wide receivers coach, which certainly jives with his background as well. That's a position that he had held previously at Army when he worked there. So, James Franklin had talked before, I remember him saying about staff flexibility and the importance of having guys who are willing to coach at different spots, and kind of, he always pointed to Ricky Ronnie as a guy who, of course, came here, coached the quarterbacks, then shifted over and coached the tight ends, and at Ronnie's previous stops, he'd coached other positions on offense, and now he becomes your offensive coordinator. So having that versatility on the staff, having that flexibility is certainly a good thing. But when it comes to recruiting and the fact that the second wave, the signing day, but now not the real signing day, the one that's coming in February, where Penn State figures to add a few more players to their highly touted 2018 class, that's one where this staff now has to go out, fill in those holes in this class, those final few spots, but also, you're kind of playing behind the eight ball here and building relationships, because I noticed on Twitter the other night, one of the first people that Snyder had followed when all these rumors came up was, of course, running back signee Ricky Slade, right? So if you're Ricky Slade and you're Slade's family, your son's been committed to Penn State, signed with Penn State, then you lose Charles Huff in that recruitment, in that process. Then you think that, maybe David Corley's that guy. But ultimately, whenever you move assistants around, it's not nearly as big of a deal as head coaches. A lot of these players, I'm not sure what exactly the numbers on this would be. And maybe this is something I'll look up this offseason because I think it would be interesting. But on most staffs, how many of these assistant coaches, position coaches, are in these same roles for all 4 years or 3 years that a kid's at a school? I just can't imagine that it would be that many of them. And people will say, oh, well, Penn State back in the day. Certainly totally different circumstances then compared to now. And the kids get that. The families get that. But I think the biggest thing for Penn State is, here we are as I'm recording this on Thursday, January 25th, and you've just got to put the finishing touches on your 2018 class and then get ready for spring ball, because this thing keeps on moving. But I am curious to see in, 2019, 2020, what Snyder's ties in South Florida could mean for Penn State and recruiting and continuing to expand their reach. We saw Penn State have some success 2 cycles ago in Detroit, where they went into, an area that has a ton of talent. People always look at, Cass Tech, that's right there in Detroit, as, a place that produces a lot of big-time talents. And Penn State, Tim Banks had ties to that area, so he helped their efforts there. So they've had some success there. We also saw in this previous class, and of course, with Isaiah Humphries being from Texas, with his dad's connections to Penn State, you see some of that, but you see Penn State going and get a couple of kids from Texas in this 2018 class. That's, again, huge area, but you're making some inroads there. But now you kind of expand that to South Florida. And I know at one point, South Florida was an area that Rutgers actually had hit pretty hard a while back. I want to say maybe 5 or so years back. So that could be something for Penn State just to keep an eye on moving forward. And of course, you now have Phil Galliano, who factors into this recruiting effort as well. You have Tyler Bowen, the new tight ends coach, who also will be the offensive recruiting coordinator. So that'll be a big spot to fill. And I would imagine at some point this offseason, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk with all of these new assistant coaches, because there are so many of them. But right now, I'm sure they're hitting the ground running as they get this thing moving. When we come back here on the Penn State Show on DK Sports Radio, we'll look around at some of the other news that's popped up within the past week. Some surprising numbers on Penn State's offense, a little bit at the Senior Bowl, and whatever else happens when we come back here on the Penn State Show.
Mike Lang here, reminding you it's hockey season, and Lions Pride has everything Penn State for every Penn Stater. Oh, hallelujah, Hollywood. They have a wide selection of hockey hats, t-shirts, jerseys, and hoodies. Lions Pride is your one-stop Penn State shop for the Nittany Lion hockey fan in your family. Get in the fast lane, Grandma, and stop by our store at 112 East College Avenue before or after the games at Pakula Arena, or shop online 24/7 at lions-pride.com. Lions Pride, everything Penn State for every Penn Stater.
Football season is here, and it's time to cash in on the nonstop sports action with MyBookie.ag. They have in-game live betting on nearly every sporting event. Plus, MyBookie.ag will match your deposit with a bonus up to 100%. With decades of expertise and no-hassle payouts, you'll experience the greatest customer service in the business. Guaranteed. Use promo code DKRadio to activate your bonus of up to 100%. Call 844-900-BETS or visit MyBookie.ag to open an account. Sign up today.
Miller Lite is the original light beer, and we'll always brew it to have more taste, with only 96 calories and 3.2 carbs. Because we believe that if you compromise on taste, you can taste the compromise. Miller Lite. Hold true.
Great beer, great responsibility. 2018 Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Average analysis, 12 fluid ounces. Less than 1 gram protein, 0 grams fat.
What I want from my public accounting firm is big ideas.
But I don't want to lose the personal attention.
My company needs global capabilities.
From a firm with local ownership.
And I want to work with industry experts.
Who take the time to understand my unique challenges. And that's what sets Snyder Downs apart. Expertise for the most complex business issues. With the service you need every day. To learn how our big thinking with a personal focus can help your company, visit SnyderDowns.com.
If you're one of the thousands of Western Pennsylvanians who love to get outdoors, then you need to check out this amazing new website, stepoutside.org. Hi, I'm Dan Kovacevic of DK Sports Radio. I'm born and raised in Pittsburgh. I know about the outdoor life that's available to all of us in Western Pennsylvania. Learn where, when, and how you can go camping, hiking, hunting, take part in power sports, shooting sports, water sports in your local community, across our region, across the country at stepoutside.org.
Welcome back to the Penn State Show here on DK Sports Radio. As always, I'm Audrey Snyder, and looking ahead to this weekend, if you're not into the Pro Bowl, looking for something to watch, Penn State will have 4 former players out participating in the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. And that's a game where, you know, the practices are so important leading up to this thing. I mean, this is where you get a lot of teams with a lot of eyes on these guys. The game itself will be played Saturday at 2:30 in the afternoon on the NFL Network. And Penn State has cornerback Christian Campbell out there, safety Marcus Allen, tight end Mike Gesicki, and receiver Deshaun Hamilton. Last week, it was Jason Cabinda was playing in a showcase game, Troy Apke, Grant Haley, Parker Cothran, Curtis Cothran. So Penn State, you know, as you expected the last couple years, I know last year's especially, it was okay, Chris Godwin gets drafted, then people are saying, well, where are all the Penn State players? Well, you knew a year like this one that we're in the midst of now was happening, where you were going to have a lot of guys, of course, headlined by Saquon Barkley, that were going to be highly touted NFL prospects. And that's just, you know, this thing comes in waves. I mean, this is just how it goes. And I do think the next few years, you'll probably see quite a few Penn State kids. I haven't seen any official combine invitations sent out just yet, but that should be coming up here soon. And while Barkley gets all of the headlines, and understandably so, when it comes to, you know, the draft and, you know, top 5 pick and potentially a top 3 pick, we'll have to see. Still, I don't even think you can rule out that he could go 1 overall. Who knows what Cleveland decides to do there. But looking at guys like cornerback Christian Campbell, this is someone who, you know, I'm sure Penn State fans remember. I'm sure they remember that he also was a key special teams player, guy that, you know, made some plays. But you look at him, and Campbell measured in at the Senior Bowl this week, 6 foot, 192 pounds. So this is a guy who has that NFL body, that, you know, size, that long, rangy potential that you look for from cornerbacks. And I remember, you know, talking with Terry Smith way back, whether it was this summer or maybe even the spring before, but just how high he was on Christian Campbell, among other players, but just that, you know, this is someone that they think, while a little bit, you know, probably under the radar in his collegiate career, could transition pretty well at the next level. I think you look at the NFL right now, you look at a guy like Trevor Williams and what he was able to do in San Diego. This is a guy that, you know, Penn State fans surely remember him from his collegiate career, but it isn't someone that, you know, you don't see people wearing his jersey numbered in the stadium, that kind of thing. But I think they've just churned out throughout the years kind of some more of these under-the-radar players. You look at a guy like Stefan Wisniewski, who's going to the Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, he certainly had a big-time collegiate career, but this is a guy who then now has really produced. And if anybody watched the Eagles' divisional win against Atlanta, I mean, he was laying some nasty blocks, Wisniewski. I mean, it was pretty impressive. But, you know, as these guys go through the Senior Bowl, Marcus Allen, I'm really curious to see where he kind of projects, because physically he measured in 6'2", 215 pounds, but I'm really curious there because I think a lot of teams are going to see that size. And when I was out at the office earlier this week, Dale Lally and I were talking about this, and we said, you see this size, and this is a guy that teams have to be liking because they say, okay, you know what? He could have a little bit of, that hybrid linebacker role if he puts on some more weight. He's a hard hitter. We saw that in college. Certainly doesn't shy away from the physicality that's needed at that position. But I think he's another one that you're just going to have to kind of wait and see where the projection is. If this is somebody that you see go between, rounds 3 and 5, potentially on the back end of that, you have to see. Tight end Mike Gesicki, I think, is also another one who's more interesting. I was seeing some clips that were, coming out of Mobile this week where he looked pretty dominant against some of these guys. And the thing there as Penn State fans, as you all certainly know, at 6'5", 242 pounds, he's got that unique skill set, that, special size and speed combination that you just can't teach. But we've also seen the flip side of that here, right? With, the blocking, and can that translate? Can that be improved at the next level? How much of an issue is that? And so that's where I think you kind of have to wonder with that, where that shakes out. But someone so far who's really helped himself throughout this process has been receiver Deshaun Hamilton. Hamilton was out at the East-West Shrine game this past weekend, really was impressing people out there throughout his workouts, throughout the practice leading up to the game. Impressed them enough that he was actually a late add to the Senior Bowl. So got added to the Senior Bowl roster, is out in Mobile now, 6 foot, 202 pounds. And I know one of the questions in the next segment, someone had asked me this week about replacing Hamilton and, what can Penn State do? And I was running some numbers within the past week, just looking at Penn State's offense and, how do you kind of duplicate so much of their production? And, I'll be honest, off the top of my head, I was not aware until I looked at the numbers side by side just how similar Deshaun Hamilton's numbers were from his past year, from his 5th year, as they were to Chris Godwin's numbers when Godwin was a junior. I think, it's just kind of maybe the way Hamilton did some of this stuff. It was kind of, I feel like quietly here and there. And then, of course, in the Fiesta Bowl, you see him. This guy made a lot of clutch catches during his Penn State career. And I think you kind of look at a career that was bookended with some really solid seasons. But Hamilton, this past year for Penn State, had 25 catches of 16-plus yards, finishes with 53 catches, 857 yards, 9 touchdowns. And really, for me, the thing that stood out with that was you're looking at a guy who's averaging 16.2 yards per catch. That's a pretty substantial clip. And where I say these numbers stack up with Godwin, the year before, Godwin had 24 catches of 16-plus. So Hamilton actually had one more chunk play this year than Chris Godwin did last year, which, of course, you have a 1-game differential there. Hamilton put these numbers up in 13 games. Godwin last year, 59 catches, 982 yards, 11 touchdowns, 16.6 yards per reception. And that, of course, was through 14 games. And Godwin, was able to be taken in the 3rd round. And he, especially toward the end of the year, keeping an eye on him in the NFL, was really starting to come on strong toward the end of the year. But I'm very curious to see what this means for Hamilton and kind of his NFL trajectory. This is an older guy who, everybody that I had talked to about him the last couple of years really praised him for his work ethic, for the routes that he runs, and I think he really showed that this year for Penn State. And as this process continues, this is a guy who has only helped himself. And when we come back here for our 3rd and final segment, I'll talk a little bit more about Hamilton, but mainly about who steps into his shoes and answer a few more of your questions from this past week when we return here on the Penn State Show on DK Sports Radio.
Mike Lang here reminding you it's hockey season, and Lions Pride has everything Penn State for every Penn Stater. Oh, hallelujah, Hollywood. They have a wide selection of hockey hats, t-shirts, jerseys, and hoodies. Lions Pride is your one-stop Penn State shop for the Nittany Lion hockey fan in your family. Get in the fast lane, Grandma, and stop by our store at 112 East College Avenue before or after the games at Pakula Arena, or shop online 24/7 at lions-pride.com. Lions Pride, everything Penn State for every Penn Stater.
In Pittsburgh, we bleed black and gold and love our city. Born in Pittsburgh and now celebrating 130 years in the business, Henny Jewelers is proud to be your premier jewelry store. The holiday season is quickly approaching, so whether it's choosing that watch you've always wanted or you're searching for the ring that was made for her, trust Henny Jewelers. Visit our store on Walnut Street in Shadyside to see our extensive inventory of designer engagement rings, watches, and one-of-a-kind jewelry. For more, go to hennyjewelers.com and follow us on social.
Embarrassed by that stained carpet in your office? Tired of looking at your dull, dirty floor? My Floor Needs is here to fix that. With years of experience and 24/7 service, My Floor Needs offers stripping and waxing, carpet, tile, grout, and concrete cleaning, as well as polishing and buffing services. Call 888-67-MY-FLOOR or email info@myfloorneeds.com for a free estimate and get your floors looking like new again. Whatever your floor needs, call 888-67-MY-FLOOR.
Does your company ever miss its sales goals or struggle getting new business?
Is it tough to hire or to give reps the right tools?
Hi, I'm Dan, and I started Engaged Prospect right here in Pittsburgh to help companies like yours.
And I'm Sam. We're helping companies hit sales goals and grow their businesses.
Think of us as your inside sales team.
Our clients are experts in their fields. We're experts in inside sales.
Give us a call today at 412-715-5151.
Or visit us online at engagedprospect.com/DK.
It's been 50 years since the Summer of Love, but if you're not performing as well as you'd like, check out NEDforless.com. I'm Eric Cushy of Curtis Pharmacy. Don't pay premium prices for the little blue pill. So Denafil, the same active ingredient as in Viagra, costs 80% less. NEDforless.com. All we need is your physician's name. We do the rest. Free shipping, too. NDDforless.com. Curtis Pharmacy, Western PA's Better Way Pharmacy. CurtisPharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the Penn State Show here on DK Sports Radio. Audrey Snyder here in, well, chilly State College, as expected this time of year. But in our third and final segment, I'm going to sift through some of your questions that were asked throughout the past week. And again, if there's anything on your mind or question you've been bugging to ask me and haven't had the chance, feel free to drop it in the comments section right below, or throughout any of the stories during the week. I'll kind of comb through there, and would like to make this a little bit of a weekly mailbag segment that'll help keep things moving along nice and smooth during the off season. First question this week comes from Iron City 40, and his question is about Penn State and the tight ends. And Iron City wanted to know, with Mike Gesicki graduated, you still have John Holland and Nick Bowers who are here, but what happens at that tight end spot? You know, could either of these, younger guys that they have, guys like Danny Dalton, Pat Freiermuth, you also have their early enrollee, Zach Kuntz, who's on campus. Will any of these guys factor in next season? I think the quick answer to that is tight end has to be an area of concern moving forward for this offense. You look at everything that Gesicki did for this offense, and that's something that, I mentioned in the last segment with Hamilton and the explosive plays. I think making up for both of those guys is going to be such a challenge for this offense. And I say that mainly because I just haven't seen anything so far that has proven to me that Nick Bowers can stay healthy and can stay on the field. This is a guy who, when he got here, I remember a lot of the coaches were really high on Nick Bowers. They really liked his athleticism. If you guys remember back to probably at least 2 summers ago, there was a viral video that circulated of Bowers dunking over someone, playing basketball, just pick up hoops. And it was just this, crazy size to explosiveness, this weird ratio that in some ways was like Gesicki, where you just have that, that athlete that can do so much for you. But the injury bug, he's been bitten hard by it during his time at Penn State. And even last offseason, this was a guy I remember talking to James Franklin in Chicago, asking about Bowers and, what could you expect from him? And we just didn't see it this year. I mean, he did end up with 1 touchdown reception, I believe. But most of this year he had been banged up. So you've seen that. We saw flashes of Jonathan Holland. We saw him on special teams before, but still I think the drop-off there from Gesicki to, whether it's a healthy Bowers or a healthy Holland is significant. So then I think you look at some of these younger guys that they brought in, and can they make that transition quickly enough? And I think they're going to need someone to do that. You bring in a highly touted tight end, like they did with Zach Kuntz from Camp Hill, and I don't know if, where we're going to have to see kind of through spring ball, through summer, whether or not they play him right away. I think there's definitely a lot of intrigue there. Certainly a highly touted guy, but you're asking those guys to do an awful lot. I mean, we saw it before with Adam Brenneman when he came in, and, again, a highly touted guy, was able to step in early on, but can you keep these guys on the field? And between that crop of tight ends, you're going to need somebody to step up this year. But for the time being, I'm not so sure who that person is going to be. And the other question that had popped up and I'd alluded to earlier on was about replacing Deshaun Hamilton. And, is Brandon Polk going to be more of a factor in that role? Or, is it DeAndre Tompkins? And I think the easy answer there is probably that you're going to see Tompkins' numbers improve next year in his senior season. I think that's certainly a given. I also would say that it's certainly seems likely that you could see Juwan Johnson take another step or maybe even 2 steps ahead. I mean, I think you look at Johnson, the numbers that he was able to put up this year, the play that, of course, always sticks out is the clutch touchdown at Iowa, for the win for Penn State. And this is a guy who physically just has all the tools already to put it together to be an elite-level receiver. And so I think you're going to see Johnson's numbers go up. But I do think you'll see the same thing as far as an increase in catches from Tompkins. But someone else who factors in here should be Polk. Also, KJ Hamler, I think, is a name that Penn State fans should be getting a little bit familiar with. Hamler, of course, early enrolled last January. At the time, he had been at IMG Academy, was coming off of a knee injury, but took a redshirt this past year, and he was someone who a lot of teammates had praised on the scout team this year, that his speed was really impressive. I had a chance to watch Hamler a couple summers ago when he was out at the opening, before he had verbally committed to Penn State. And, you're out on the field with a bunch of other 4 and 5 star guys. And Hamler was really just, you noticed that speed. It was something that it just stood out to you right away and impressed you right away. So I do think there's a spot for a guy like that on the field, as is Brandon Polk. I mean, if they can keep Polk healthy, we saw some of those flashes as not to bring back bad memories, but as the jet sweep extraordinaire in John Donovan's offense during his true freshman season. So I think those are names to know, but I would also add Justin Shorter into the mix. The Penn State wide receiver signee. This is, again, you look at the way that the staff has recruited and the talent that they brought in, and a good amount of that talent has been at wide receiver and running back, especially when you think about it, this offense next year. Juwan Johnson was a highly touted guy. Miles Sanders was a highly touted guy. You get Ricky Slade on campus this summer, highly touted guy. Justin Shorter is another one of those guys, a name to know, a guy to get familiar with. And James Franklin will never commit anyone to playing or to sitting right away, but you just look at what Shorter was able to do, and I think that you have to say that, at least for the time being, this is a guy who could come in and could play next year, should it be needed. But I think then you come down to kind of weighing out the options, and will Penn State need him next year or won't they? And that's something that we really won't know until, camp. I mean, you can look at it in spring ball, of course, but really once camp gets rolling, then you'll have a better idea. But again, if you guys any extra questions, anything on your mind, as always, feel free to drop them in the comment section. Within the coming week, I've got a few different stories to work on, one piece on the offensive line. I also have some other stuff I've been meaning to get to from as far as Penn State's scout team and what other players and coaches had said about guys from all throughout this past season who impressed, some more names to know. And then I'll get into my, breakdown, kind of position by position, offense, defense, special teams, questions for this team and so on and so forth as we build up to the second signing period and kind of put the finishing touches on this 2018 class. But until next week, take care.